I didn't choose to be born into Scientology, just as I didn't choose to be raped by Danny Masterson, said one of the accusers of Danny Masterson, later identified as Jane Doe.
The media is obliged to report that as Scientology's response, instead of Scientology's blatant lie, which is what it was, day after day after day. And I don't know, I just hope that it's getting through to people that this is a criminal organization pretending to be a religion.
Another movie I've got to ask you about as well, it is in cinemas here as well. It is Louis Theroux's movie, My Scientology Movie. Now, look,
what is that?
It's My Scientology Movie by Louis Theroux. What do you think about the fact that people are still making these films? Do you care? Do you have a view on it at all?
No, you know what? It's something that has helped me incredibly in my life.
Yeah.
I've been a Scientologist for over 30 years,
yeah.
and it's something that, as you know, without it, I wouldn't be where I am.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a beautiful religion, and I'm very proud.
In our previous video about Danny Masterson, we clarified several doubts about the kind of person he appeared to be. But could his behavior have been influenced by his associations? Everyone knows that Danny Masterson was accused of sexually assaulting several women, including the well-known Chrissie Carnell. However, not everyone is aware of the religion Danny Masterson belongs to, or what actually happened to the victims once they reported Masterson's sexual acts to the police because of his affiliations.
You are pathetic, disturbed, and completely violent. The world is better off with you in prison. So that's what one of Danny Masterson's rape victims told him before he learned his fate.
Danny Masterson belonged to the Church of Scientology, a complete set of beliefs and practices variously defined as a cult, a business, a religion, a scam, or a new religious movement. But how can this church turn someone's life upside down like the victims of Danny Masterson or the culprit himself? One reason is the group's alleged abuse and harassment. Former members and critics have accused the church of abusive practices, including psychological manipulation, physical abuse, and harassment. There have been numerous reports of former members being stalked, harassed, or sued by the church when they speak out against it. This is exactly what happened to the victims of Danny Masterson's sexual assault case. And if that's not enough, the church Danny Masterson belonged to has faced numerous legal battles worldwide, including allegations of human trafficking, forced labor, and obstruction of justice. Additionally, the church has been accused of exploiting its tax-exempt status as a religion for financial benefit. However, what truly makes this group controversial is its secretive nature. The church has been criticized for keeping its advanced teachings, particularly those about the galactic overlord Xenu, confidential and only revealing them to members who have reached certain levels of commitment and financial contribution. This secrecy has led to suspicions and allegations of the church operating like a cult.
Xenu is supposed to be an intergalactic warrior lord. I would say about 90% of people in Scientology have never heard of Xenu. You don't learn about Xenu until you get to OT3, which would probably cost you £100,000 to get there, so most people don't even make it that far.
Now, the women who ultimately went against Danny Masterson, meaning going against the church, faced a ton of negative criticism. Several of Danny Masterson's victims reported that they experienced intimidation and harassment from members of the Church of Scientology after they came forward with their allegations. The church allegedly engaged in a campaign of discredit and silenced the victims. Victims reported being followed and watched by individuals they believed were associated with Scientology. Some victims received threatening letters or phone calls warning them against pursuing legal action or speaking out publicly. And to make things worse, the church even allegedly spread rumors and false information to damage the reputations of the victims, suggesting they were lying or had ulterior motives. But that was just the tip of the iceberg going against Danny Masterson and the church. Victims who were Scientologists at the time of the assaults were reportedly pressured by the church to handle the situation internally rather than going to the police. The church has a practice called internal ethics, where members are encouraged to resolve issues within the organization and not tell anyone outside of the church, which they consider a very strict rule. Victims were told that reporting the assault to law enforcement would bring negative attention and result in severe consequences for them, and some victims were even pressured into signing non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, that prohibited them from discussing their experiences outside the church's internal system.
Good morning to you. Scientology, of course, has long been known for its celebrity followers. Now the church and one of its stars, Danny Masterson, are both being sued. 4 women claim Masterson sexually assaulted them, and then the actor conspired with the church to cover up the alleged assaults and stalk and harass them.
After combining all these threats from the organization, the victims were faced with severe legal and psychological impacts. The church's interference allegedly obstructed justice, making it difficult for the victims to pursue legal action against Masterson. And it didn't stop there. The ongoing harassment and intimidation led to increased anxiety, fear, and psychological trauma for them. Many experienced significant emotional distress and felt isolated due to the church's efforts to silence them. But unfortunately, they were unsuccessful, since most of Danny's victims stood up for themselves and told the court everything. And you know what's surprising? Most of his victims also belonged to the church, not only Danny Masterson. It's a question of why would someone go after their own people, the very people who had been with them through thick and thin? It seems that the church has no regrets of doing such things with victims or whatsoever, because they not only attacked the victims, but the prosecutors who went against Danny Masterson. Efforts were made to break into the prosecutor's residence and to force him off the road. His car windows were shattered, electronic devices tampered with, and he was subjected to surveillance. While seeking co-counsel, the prosecutor was taking precautions about possible harassment and stalking. 2 attorneys declined due to apprehension before the prosecutor secured co-counsel, and even the detectives who were involved in the case.
I think it's the tone of the letters and the sort of irony in some of the letters. For example, many of the letter writers refer to Danny's work against drugs. And I kept thinking, do you realize you're writing a letter for a guy who's been convicted of drugging and raping women?
LAPD detectives involved in the investigation faced stalking, surveillance, and harassment. During the criminal trial, the Church of Scientology's head of security, accompanied by attorney Vicky Podporeski, met with the LAPD chief of police, and astonishingly, they accused the detectives and prosecutors of misconduct, presenting boxes of evidence to support claims that witness testimony had been falsified, exaggerated, or coached, and that evidence had been withheld. According to prosecutor Mueller, this intervention affected the case as one detective became reluctant to testify. One of the sexual assault victims reported numerous instances of harassment, including tampered security systems, car vandalism, and an attempt to run them off the road. Another victim stated they were followed during the criminal trial.
They had gone into court on Thursday and gave these heart-rending victim impact statements. They're just absolutely incredible statements that these women made. And I also really like the way Jane Doe 1 repeatedly brought it back to Scientology and explained how Scientology made everything worse, re-victimized them time and time again, and has continued to harass them to this very day. So I don't want people to forget what a big part of this trial Scientology was.
However, despite numerous efforts to prevent Danny Masterson from facing sentencing, they ultimately proved unsuccessful. On September 7, 2023, Masterson received a sentence of 30 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 25.5 years, though the potential for lifelong imprisonment exists. His legal team has indicated plans to appeal the conviction. Masterson entered North Kern State Prison on December 27, 2023, following several months of post-sentencing hearing. He has since been relocated and is currently housed at the California Men's Colony.
A Los Angeles judge has sentenced one of the stars of That 70s Show, Danny Masterson, to 30 years to life in prison for raping 2 women.
That's a wrap for today's video. What are your thoughts on the organization Danny was associated with? Do you believe the victims would have experienced peace if neither they nor Danny had any ties to the church? Or do you think they would still target the victims simply because Danny held a prominent position with them? If you enjoyed this video and want to watch more fascinating topics like this, click on the video that's popping up on your screen. Until then, take care and goodbye.